discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Liam Scheff Show on Truth Frequency Radio, UCY TV. It's going to be 2 hours of stream of consciousness. I will be incredibly offensive to everyone. That is a promise I can make and one I can keep. We will explore ideas down to the nitty-gritty. We will go down to the roots and below into the deep, deep subsoil, leaving no stone unturned and no turn unstoned, I guess. In the news headlines, Amanda Peet is now the new globalist horror, according to the anti-vaccine movement. Amanda Peet is now being targeted among a number of other Hollywood dipshit, a-hole, idiot, jackass people who happen to be actors who don't know anything and don't know how to read. I like Amanda. By the way, I like Amanda Peet. I think she's funny. I think she's been good in a lot of movies. I'm just speaking generally about all the whores in Hollywood who stand up and say things because they're too stupid to understand because they don't read. And they're just victims of the medical infrastructure anyway. Amanda Peet is now being targeted, and TruthKings.com has Amanda Peet's vaccine lie. And it's a poorly written article there at TruthKings.com that is more speculative than anything else. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's sort of just buttering the bread of our side is better than your side, and your side is worse than our side. I get it. I do. Everybody wants to be tribal in their fight. And it's too bad that Amanda Peet has to now be, a globalist whore for pharma corporations. But then again, we're not taught anything that's true in school. We're not taught anything that's true anywhere. Nobody's taught anything true anywhere. We're barely taught how to tie our shoes correctly. In fact, the first person who taught me to tie my shoes taught me to tie them in a way I've never tied them since. They made one big loop with one hand and one big loop with another, and then they knotted them. I never do that. Make a loop, I go around and I pull the thing through and make the other loop. So nobody teaches you anything quite the right way. And that's the nature of life. And if we understood that we were born inside of a giant system of lies, and that's the way it is, and you'll find your way out bit by bit if you do, but that the whole world is so enraptured in a big lie, it is so contained in the bubble of an even bigger lie, that these little things that we overcome bit by bit, the Kennedy assassination, 9/11, what else? Vaccination, HIV, that's a big one for most people, because HIV hits at one of the big planks of our belief systems, namely sex. So HIV hits at a big plank, so it's too deep for most people to get into, too deep. We're conditioned to be afraid of sex. Sex is a problem anyway. If you have sex with a person you're not supposed to have sex, or you think about having sex with a person you're not supposed to have sex with, you're a bad person. You can lose all of your support and family and respect. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen among people who aren't grown up enough to be called grown-ups. They have to totally undermine each other once they're, it's admitted that they're having extra relationship attractions and that sort of thing. They undermine each other, they go crazy, they flip out, they betray each other, then they have to go to therapy forever to talk about why the thing has fizzled a little bit. And it's just the nature of relationships that they ebb and flow, and that relationships with many kids will many kids will eat up the energy of the relationship. And we're not good communicators by and large. We're not trained to communicate. Communication is a relationship unto itself. You have to put a lot of energy into it. I think it's worth it with somebody who you truly love. I think it's really worth it to really know each other. But most people aren't trained to do that. They're trained to get along, go along, don't rock the boat too much, and that's what we do. So Amanda Peet is the new vaccine whore, according to Truth Kings or whatever. But it doesn't matter, because beating up on Amanda Peet won't really help anybody figure out what's in a vaccine. And I really only think there's one question about vaccines, which is what is in a vaccine, how are they manufactured, what goes into them, and what are the effects of those things when injected into the muscle and fat tissue of a human body. it's a very straightforward question. You could test it on rats if you wanted to, and they have, and they found out the answer is don't use these things on people. But that's not good enough because vaccination is a belief system. It's a religious occultic belief system based mainly in the previous occultic belief system that said you have to cut something off a boy's penis, or you have to baptize them, you have to give them some welcoming into the world. As we became non-religious, we sublimated our religion. We really didn't subvert it. We sublimated it into the sciences. And it just sort of is now in the dark spaces of the sciences, really in the cracks between everything you see in the science is religion lurking right beneath. So we'll talk about that more. I've been having my mind... No. Hold on. I was going to say my mind blown. I don't know where you were headed with that thought. I've been getting my mind very blown lately by... my head is exploding from all this stuff I'm reading. So I'm reading about catastrophism. And if you want some interesting reading, read about the actual geological history of the planet. It is a cluster bomb waiting to go off in the world of acceptable, slow Darwinist science. This is Liam Scheff Show on Truth Frequency Radio, UCY TV. You can support this show. We're going to talk about peer review. In the second half hour, we're going to talk about catastrophism, that stuff that will blow your mind. This show is a stream of consciousness. I often derail myself and then get back on the rails later. Oh, I hear thunder. I think there's a storm coming in. Wonder if I should unplug. How good is the grounding? Thunder and lightning. Things we'll be talking about a lot in the coming months. Let's go over last week a little bit. I went on and on about vaccines. I called a lot of people cunts and fucking cunts and doctor cunts and cunty doctors and medical industry, a bunch of cunts. I use the word cunt a lot. And I won't use it at all on this show. Or that will be the last of that. And I talked about Andy Wakefield's movie, high five, kudos all around for doing it. I was disappointed that they don't go into what is in a vaccine, just sort of punch the issue on the nose, punch it on the chin, knock it out. Question is, what is in a vaccine? You got to be a reductionist sometimes when you're talking biologically and you're talking about chemicals that you're inserting. You have to ask what they do in the body as far as you can tell. That question is not being asked in the movie. What they are talking about what vaccines as a going concern seem to do or do in kids in the triple MMR vaccine. So it's a wake-up call for many people, but I dare say you're going to have to go deeper to get to the root of the issue. Still, I look forward to seeing it. Talked about enemas, coffee enemas. Yeah, talked about how not to do one. I've gotten much better at doing them. Big trick is you don't put as much in. I know you have to go back to last week's episode, but I had a hydroplaning incident. I won't go into the details, but anyway, if you hold too much, you may have to release it too quickly, and yeah. So a little bit less, simple solution, just pure exercise and volume, not mass, but perhaps matter, and a little bit less, and then I had an incident in another coffee enema experience. I went to do the coffee enema, and that means first you get the enema bag and you put in some clean water and you whoop, and then you do a little empty out, like just 4 minutes in, and then empty out 5 minutes, and then you're ready to receive the coffee without any Mississippi mud pie being in the way. Thank you for that analogy from some part of my brain. So I did it, and I didn't put in that much coffee because I just didn't want to have that much pressure so that I could hold it for much longer, because apparently apparently I don't hold coffee in my tuchus as well as I kind of thought I would, and it just wants to, so I put in a little bit less. Now here, get this. Nothing came out. No, I put in about a cup and a half, 2 cups, not big cups, but, your basic tea cup, coffee cup from the old-fashioned restaurant, a coffee cup, probably 6 ounces. So maybe I put in 10. I don't know. Maybe I put in 6. Maybe I put in 10 ounces. And 10 ounces look like. Let me look at my bottle here. It's 15. Yeah. Okay. So maybe 10. Maybe 10 ounces. And maybe I put in less. Maybe I put in 8. Maybe I put in 7. Okay. So I put in a number, just record this and play it back. Maybe I put in 8. Maybe I put in 7. Okay, so I'm talking about coffee. Thank you. Just get your mind out of the tuchus. So I put coffee into my tuchus, and then I just lay there for a while, and then I realized it wasn't a lot of pressure, so I decided to make the bed, and I got up and I made the bed, and then I decided to actually wash and do everything in the enema bag, so I just washed it, and I still was holding it, and then I'm like, well, I guess it probably was about 20 minutes later, and I thought, I'd better go to the bathroom, try to get the rest of the coffee out of me, and I sat down, and nothing happened, and I just sat there for a while, and then I had like an espresso I maybe I maybe filled in a... I'm sorry to be putting you through this, by the way, but you deserve it. Maybe it was an espresso cup, is all I'm going to say. And then I remember I put in a coffee cup. So I kept a little of the coffee. I'm just saying that can happen too. I didn't expect that, but I think I absorbed it. The colon is very absorbent, which is why you're not supposed to put poison up your tuchus. And why I'm on this sort of coffee enema kick is beyond me. I'm convinced I'm trying to clean my liver. I'm trying to hyper clean my liver. And I didn't feel bad. I didn't walk around. I wasn't hey, everybody, I had a lot of coffee today. I wasn't like that. Like, hey, how you doing, everybody? I had a lot of coffee. I had a cup of Joe. Would you like a cup of Joe? I had a cup of Joe right in my... it wasn't like that. It was like I took coffee up into my tuchus and I'm running around like a crazy person. It wasn't even like I drank coffee. When I drink coffee, I'm like that. Hey, I just had a cup of coffee. What are you doing? You remember Bugs Bunny from the 50s? I remember that. In 1970, I used to watch Battle of the Planets. Hey, you ever read Gurdjieff? Gurdjieff's very interesting. Every Velikovsky is a wild man. When I drink coffee, it's like that. It's very, very fast. Very stream of consciousness, but the stream of consciousness is amperes. It's 1,000 amps. Maybe it's it's 10,000 amps coming through me at coffee speed. But it wasn't like that. I just walked around for the rest of the day going, I drank a cup of coffee with my asshole, and I think I deserve some kind of award for that. Now on to more serious matters, like Sirius A and Sirius B. Those are stars in the heaven. I think for the longest time we thought that it was just the star Sirius, but then they got a better look at it and realized it was twins. No, astronomers can never really understand. Yeah, I'm just moving on. I know. I'm just trying to make you feel okay about doing coffee enemas to clean your liver, because Lord knows I'm doing coffee enemas to clean my liver. I've even done a little bit of yoga while doing them. I've even almost done the plow. In fact, that was one of the more comfortable positions when I was using a little bit too much coffee. You get into the plow, you put your feet back, or forward or whatever, over, and you try to touch the ground, and it would be either behind or in front of you, I guess, depending on, probably in front of you, but you're upside down and you're bending your neck. Anyway, it sounds a little impossible, but it works. And that kind of worked, and I think, my body's like, are you trying to get this to your stomach? Because it's not going to work. I'm like, no, body, I'm just trying not to spill it on the floor. Thank you. Coffee enemas, coffee enemas, coffee enemas. Now, how am I going to, in a serious manner, transition to the subject of peer review? Well, I'm not going to in a serious manner. Instead, I'm going to take a quick commercial break by saying, this is the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV and Truth Frequency Radio, where a cup of coffee is yours for the asking. We're going to clean our livers, we're going to clean our brains, we're going to go stream of consciousness on you, and I'm going to jump into the concept of peer review, because like a coffee enema gone wrong, I went to my YouTube page because I had a video that got like 17,000 hits, which is a lot for me. People, I got a handful of fans, 1,000, couple thousand, sometimes they'll watch some of these video things. Now on Facebook, I'll get 3,000, 2,000, 8,000 people watching a video. But on YouTube, I'm lucky to get a few hundred over time, maybe 1,000 over a couple of weeks. It's not great numbers, not for YouTube. It's like people don't even know I'm there. Like Facebook, people wouldn't get, forever and ever and ever, people weren't getting my stuff. Like they said, you post something and I don't see it unless I go to your page. Well, that's interesting. I put it up, I shared it. So I don't know if I was being blocked or what, but now people are sharing my stuff more widely, so more people are aware of it, so it's somehow the algorithm lets it into the stream more quickly, because Facebook likes to be successful, and if people want to click on something, they just want you to click in case you can grab the ad bait and click on the thing that says, did you know Sly Stallone was dead? Just kidding. Here, thanks for clicking. He's not. So I just went to the page. I don't try to interfere with comments on YouTube because, it's a wild west. You don't know who anybody is. Everybody's using a fake name. Bunch of fucking cunty jackass. Did I say it was the last? I said cunty, not cunt. Well, I just said it again. Damn it. I've got to stop saying the word cunt. God damn it. All right, hold on a second. Anyway, on YouTube, it's just full of cunter faces who cunt around all day long, being fucking cunts and cunting and spewing shit out of their cunts. And they're all guys, which is ironic. So they're all a bunch of science whores and cunts and douchebags, and they just spew, and they're hateful little fuck wads. And there's no reason to interact with them because they don't have anything to say, and they're not sincere. They're not saying, "Hey, I didn't know that," or "That's interesting that you think that." You know, do you have any? Can I read something else about it? They're just like, "You're incorrect, sir. I puke in your general direction. The science is not supporting you. Peer-reviewed science says that what you're saying about vaccines is wrong." And I said, well, number one, go fuck yourself. Number two, go take a dirt nap. Now, I had a friend in high school named Ted. And Ted, when he was mad, he'd say, go take a dirt nap. And he was from Tennessee. And he'd say, go take a dirt nap. Which was another nice way of saying go kill yourself. But that's not what I meant. And I'm sure that's not what he meant. But it was very funny. Take a dirt nap. I think those guys should take a dirt nap. So the guys on YouTube say, you're incorrect. The science, show me a peer-reviewed scientific, super scientific paper that says mercury is bad for you. All right, fuckwad douche faces. Here, go fuck yourselves and take a dirt nap. Thank you. Go sleep in the mud. They're not serious. And if you bother to show them one journal article on, thimerosal, that was debunked and discredited. It doesn't matter what it is. It was debunked and discredited. You're a denier of science, and you're murdering children by not injecting them with more thimerosal. So they're cunty fuck whores, and they deserve to take dirt naps. Anyway, I don't mean that they have to die. I mean they should go lay in the dirt until they're grounded enough. And what did you think I was saying? Until the electromagnetic healing balm of the earth takes over them, and they feel reconnected to the human species from which they've become lost and disconnected. So I don't really fuck around with the psychopaths, psychopaths on YouTube or Google Plus, because it's everybody. I mean, it's just anybody. Anybody can watch it and say, you're incorrect. More aluminum is good aluminum. There's no lower limit to the amount of safe aluminium. Everyone should have more aluminum. Smallpox was fixed when Edward Jenner took his own cow pus and cowpox and jabbed it into people's skulls. If you don't believe so, you're murdering children. It's kind of, stuff that you get there. So I don't usually I don't usually bother. Well, I had my videos all set to accept comments because I just naively thought that, mostly good people would comment and, a few bad eggs. And I wasn't wrong. That's really what happened. A lot of good people commented, and they had interesting comments, whether they all agreed with me or not. They were interesting comments. A lot of them were from the vaccine videos were saying, thank you for posting this. My children have been absolutely bloody destroyed by these things. And there's nothing you can say, but I'm so sorry, and thank you for sharing your story, and please share your story, and don't be cowed by the cow pus true believers. By the way, Edward Jenner was a physician who decided that jabbing people in the arm with blood and pus from other animals was good for them. This is looked upon as a revolution in science. Of course, it's the opposite of a revolution in science. It's a devolution in science. The revolution in science was using resonances and energetic healing and natural plant products, extracts and esters to heal disease, but they went into the old Babylonian form of just insanity and poisoning. I don't even know if the Babylonians were doing that, but anyway. So vaccination is not really a science. So I had to go onto YouTube and deal with all these comments, and there were a lot of crazy comments, but they were by 2 or 3 people, truly 2 or 3 people, no real names. Now, let's say I got 50 comments by people who used a real name or had a real story about people they knew or their family. And I got 50 comments, and that was 50 comments, 1 comment per person. Then, from 3 people, I got 50 comments. All the same. You're a fucktard, fuck you, you're anti-science, you're murdering children by not believing in vaccines because you don't want to give people AIDS drugs which kill the gut and kill the liver and kill the bone marrow. You're a child murderer. They always bring out the same thing. You're murdering children by not believing in us murdering children. Now, I find it interesting that people who actually murder children, the vaccinators and the AIDS drug people, are so willing to accuse other people of murdering children. I don't run around and saying vaccinators murder children. I say that it's a deadly poison and it's toxic, and it makes sense that if you just understand what's in a vaccine, that you shouldn't be doing it. I don't go, they're child murderers. I don't run around going, child murderers, child murderers. I don't. It's not. I say vaccines are clearly. In order to understand vaccines, you got to understand what's in them. You have to ask the basic question: what is in a vaccine? Answer that, and you're really more than halfway there. You're 90% there. If you can truly answer it, answer how it works in the body, you're 90% there. But people on the other side, if you say that, hey, what's in an AIDS drug? How does this so-called AIDS drug work? How does an HIV test? You're a child murderer. You're a child murderer. Okay. So I had to delete all of that, and it made me think about the thing that they always cry in their, when they're trying to be sensible. They say, do you have any peer-reviewed articles to show for this? And I decided to think about this thing called peer review. I've always known that it was a crank. It's a hoax. Peer review isn't. They use it as though they're saying peer review equals truth. Like if it's not peer reviewed, you know it's not true, or unless it's peer reviewed, you don't know if it's true. But I'm here to tell you it's exactly the opposite. If it's peer reviewed, you know it's not true. A peer-reviewed article in a major journal, a mainstream journal. I'm not talking about, scientific, borderlands of the scientific frontiers, or something from the IEEE where you're allowed to talk about plasma physics. I'm talking about your mainstream your mainstream astronomy, your mainstream biological, your mainstream chemical journals that are all being paid to toe that line and tote that barge. Tote that bale and haul that barge. If you're still pulling the chemotherapy barge, which is vaccination, cancer chemotherapy, and AIDS drugs, and every other thing, if you're pulling that, you're not allowed to publish anything that says that may not be really good for you. So peer review, where they say that it counts in these mainstream journals, leaving all the fucky cunty stuff aside, let's just be serious for a second, putting aside all the fun vulgarity that's amusing. Peer review is an insulating layer of fat around a tumor. And the tumor is the drug cartel. And the insulating layer of fat stops anything from getting in. It stops anything sane, any healing cells from getting in. It stops healthy white blood cells from ripping the thing apart and digesting it and tearing it into its component parts so that it can be excreted from the body. So what we have is this abnormal mass in the body politic and the body industrial of the United States called the pharmaceutical petronexus complex. And you have an unhealthy mass, a fatty, fluid-filled, degenerating tumor of a mass that lives to grow and suck the life out of everything around it. But it's got a thick, fatty layer on the outside, and that fatty layer is peer review. In order to protect the growing, disgusting, cancerous mass that is digesting the United States population bit by bit, you have to have this layer of insulation around it so that nobody can penetrate it, nobody can get into it, nobody's allowed to ask any reasonable questions of it. And if you come in with, something that could really do battle with this thing and help dismantle it and return the whole body to health, it says, we won't, this fatty mass won't let you through. We're not going to let you through. We're not going to let you ask this question. So peer review acts as an insulating layer. Think of it as a group of priests holding hands, with their hoods pulled down over their faces, staring inward at the fatty mass, saying, "Oh, tumor, we will." At the tumor, saying, "Oh, tumor, we will protect you no matter what. We will feed you. We will build more blood vessels to steal from the body to feed you. We will sacrifice more and more and more people to you. We will sacrifice the health of the lives of the people of the United States and Europe, of the Western world, to you, so that you can continue to grow. Because this elite priest class, lives off of the blood that we suck. We live off a little of the blood that we pour into you." It's very, very occultic and very strange. So peer review should work, in principle, to make sure that an idea going forward in a journal is a reasonable idea. But what happens instead is that the succubi, the narcissistic psychopaths, psychopaths, at the head of the so-called scientific foundations, which are really the petrochemical oligarchies, know that if they let in a competitive idea, they will lose their funding, they will lose their paycheck, they will lose their mortgage. Some of them may be brought up on, they may be wanted on charges according to the Nuremberg guidelines, because they've put so much poison into the atmosphere, so much poison into so many people, that if they admit it, somebody may, call for an inquiry at the very least. So they protect it, and they say, if you can't get through our bonded, hand clasps, which is the peer review system, then you're not allowed to publish in a journal that we will say is true. Get that? That's the important bit. These psychopaths, SCI, psychopaths, psychopathic scientists, stand in a circle, looking inward, looking outward. Some of them look outward, guarding the periphery. And if anybody tries to get in with a better idea, hey, we can cure some cancers with THC. We can cure some cancers with vitamin C. We can cure some cancers with extracts of, turmeric or Venus flytrap plant. Or, we have all kinds of things that we can do, but no, you can't get through the peer review system. Oh, sure, maybe you can get your thing into some half-assed tertiary journal that allows almost anything in, and you shrug your shoulders, and the editors say, sure, you can put it in our journal, it looks reasonable, but nobody reads us and nobody takes us seriously. So you get a peer-reviewed piece, and then you have to wait, and you say it's peer-reviewed, and it was, their peer reviewers said, yeah, it's okay, it checks out, your results check out, no big deal, because they're not paid to keep up. But the big journals, NEJM, New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, The Lancet, BMJ, British Medical Journal, and there are many others, journals of, you're not going to get through the big Elsevier journals and the big publishing house journals. You're not going to get into them. There's no way you're going to cross that boundary, because they need to protect the tumor that they're feeding. They're feeding a giant tumor. And so peer review works against innovation in science, because it's a priest class guarding its own church. Peer review is a priest class guarding its own church. Now, here on the Liam Scheff Show, you get wonderful ideas like that, put succinctly, and then you get like a half hour of cunty fuckwad just to get there. And I know. Some of you just want the cunty fuckwad, and some of you just want the distilled stuff. The Liam Scheff Show will be right back in un momento. Ah, Liam, you're saying to yourself, when will you ever learn? When will you ever learn? Some people just will not stand the cunty fuckwad talk just in order to get to the brilliance of peer review as a fatty layer around a tumor sucking the life out of America. But there it is. Here in the Liam Scheff Show, we don't discriminate against foul language. In the second half of this hour, I have some ideas about how to improve the peer review system. It's not hard to do. It wouldn't even be hard to comprehend. And I think that you'll enjoy going down that rabbit hole with me. I've received some interesting mail lately, some interesting emails and commentary. I'm reading a lot about catastrophism, which is a very different view than the very slow-boiling uniformitarianism that forms the idea of the modern world, the 4.5 billion year old, whatever it is, planet, and the 13 billion year old solar galaxy or universe. All of that's fake. Nobody knows how old anything is in that sort of time scale. In fact, the universe seems to be eternal, and what we can actually see is probably much less than what we think we see. In fact, the mistaking of redshift for total distance probably lets astronomers put things too far into the distance than they really are. So we're probably only looking at a very small corner of what seems to be an infinite system. Excuse me. We'll talk about that more on the show as time goes on. I got a cough. I'm going to hit the mute. Okay, I coughed. I breathed in some water. Yeah, I mean, there's just nothing that we're taught in the sciences that is absolutely true or real. And the deeper I go, the more it seems clear that even the structure of the earth, that the way things have proceeded, that assumptions about geology, about major geological events, about changes in the climate have been much more rapid and dramatic and shocking and catastrophic, to use that word, than we're generally allowed to think or know. And I just want to explore that a lot in the next months as I round the bend in writing the new book, and I hope to be out on a lecture circuit or on a Skype lecture circuit or whatever is easiest for everybody to do. Because I think we're at a turning point. I think the electric universe model is at a genuine turning point, and I don't say that as somebody who believes in a great cultural shift just because we want one to be, but for reasons that I'll explain as we go on the Liam Scheff Show. Let's go back with the regularly scheduled program after this 10-second break. Welcome to the second half hour of the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV, Truth Frequency Radio. Let's talk about peer review. Peer review seems to be a fatty layer protecting a very degenerated corpus of science, really of petrochemical poisoning, from facing its critics. It's like the meeting of the heads of the five families, in The Godfather. They're going to decide who gets to sell what in New York, who gets to run what, booze and drugs and alcohol, booze and drugs and prostitution. They're going to decide who's in charge of what district and how they're going to share the profits and not interfere with each other so as to not create a turf war. The medieval church was very much the same. Internally, they had many, many, many fights about what was meant by interpreting one little bit of Latin or Greek in translation and how it should affect the conduct of, hundreds of thousands or millions of people who took the bait and put that mythic hook in their mouths and swallowed it, or at least let it drag them along through life. And the church got to argue about it. Of course, there were many so-called heretics within the church who didn't believe chapter and verse as it was being translated, or argued by the athletes of God, what were they called? The scholasticists, the people who would take a tiny bit of text and explore it in a couple 100,000 words of meaningless babble in long texts that are then argued themselves and excerpted. Meanwhile, the world is going by and nobody's paying attention to anything real because they're arguing about, whether Jesus was born as a god or was made into a god, and whether Mary was a goddess or a virgin or should be considered a virgin even though she had other children, or whether they could write a story in which these things were corrected. So you can do a lot. You can make a lot of noise doing very, very, very little. And of course, people who aren't fans of my show will note that I've made plenty of noise and said a lot of dirty words. But let's get to the point of the subject. Peer review is an insulating layer of fat. It protects the disease from being purged. It protects what is wrong from being righted. Peer review is a protectorate racket. It's a protection racket that excludes people with good criticisms and better ideas from getting at the center mass and dispersing it, dispelling it. What would the word be? What would you do with an acid? What would you do with hydrogen peroxide inside the body to, expunging it? In other words, dissolving it. So we're not allowed to dissolve the disease inside the body. Peer review needs to protect it. So if you want to get peer reviewed, you go to school and you play the long academic game of sucking and spitting until you drink up and suck down all the babble and all the nonsense, all the make-believe math, all the make-believe science, all the misunderstandings of biology, all the horrifyingly reductionist chemical abuses that are now done in the name of so-called, helping people. And you memorize all of this, and then you get, oh, what a good boy you are, oh, what a good girl you are. You get a gold star after you pay your few $100,000, and then you pay a couple $100,000 more to get the next certificate, and a couple $100,000 more to take the test, and finally, $750,000 or whatever you are into debt, you emerge with your degree if you're a doctor, a little less if you're going to be a physicist or something like that. But if you're going to be a physicist, you have to stop thinking about telescopes and start thinking about Einstein. Of course, Einstein was wrong about everything, except for the idea that mass and energy are related. He was right about that. was wrong about gravity, which is what his theory of relativity was supposed to demonstrate. He was wrong about there being no ether in space. There's an ether in space. Space is flooded by low energy particles all the time. Call them neutrinos, call them whatever you want. But space is flooded by particles, ions, protons, ions, electrons. All sorts of material is out there in space, and it is a plasma in many forms, in a low glow mode, in a dark mode with very little current, very spaced out, not dense at all, very low density, and then a very dense, high voltage, high wattage mode called arc mode. So space is definitely not empty; it is full. It was a mistake to think that it was. As soon as the NASSholes sent machines out there that could detect radioactive particles, they came back and said, "Shit, it's radioactive out here. Shit, it's electromagnetic out here. Boy, were we wrong. Boy, was Einstein wrong." But the thing was chiseled onto the tablet, the stone tablet that came down from, Mount Sinai with the great leaders of the scientific revolution and Gedanken experiment, called general relativity. Einstein and his true believers, his followers, and the people who modified more mathematical abstractions to put black holes on the map. They don't belong there either. Peer review now protects these clowns. And Einstein himself threw everybody under the bus before he died. Einstein was reading Immanuel Velikovsky. Einstein was saying, yes, my castles in the sand will not stand. My castles in the air are no longer there. He said it. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them Sam I am. He said it. He wrote in a correspondence that nothing of his fancies will remain. But he didn't realize just how profitable a game of special effects he had minted for the university set. The same as our horrifying toxic approach to treating all ailments, using incredibly toxic chemicals to try to help people get better. That's not a very good idea either. That's been minting money ever since the 40s or 50s. There's a story, of course, about the early schools, the homeopathic schools, the schools of natural healing and health being dismantled after the other group came about. I think there was a fellow called, I want to say Popper, but it might have been. It might have been. I got to get this story right before I tell you all of it, or even some of it. But I do know there was a guy who came along and he codified the idea of a Western medical practice that was based on purely reductionist, molecular atomist stuff that you could dismantle, take things apart, and then put in a toxic chemical and then see what happens. And that's modern science. And it's protected by an insulating layer of fat. The universities are full of fat that you could trim. The university system itself is an Ouroboros. It's a snake eating its own serpent, eating its own tail. It's the pop culture eating itself over and over again. Where once upon a time no sane person would have imagined that there could be something in space that wasn't there, that you couldn't see, sense, or detect in any way. So now you have to worship at this altar of dark energy, dark matter, and black holes, or you're not considered serious. How the worm has turned, how strange it is to be asked to believe in things that aren't absolutely demonstrable, real, or provable in the sciences. How you have to believe that there's a molecule, that there's a little particle that causes every disease in the world, and if you're gay, and that's called HIV, and if you're not, we're looking for new viruses to blame for sickness all the time, and we'll just spray you with more carcinogenic chemicals that dismantle and disable the immune system and the gut lining, where we know the immune system lives. Now, do you understand why I use the word cunt-face shit fuckers a lot? That particular word? I just let it pop out. That's why, because they're crazy. They're hurting a lot of people. And we're supposed to be nice to them. We're supposed, they don't mean harm. A lot of people stand up for doctors. Without doctors. No, without doctors what? Without doctors what? The death rate would go down. You can keep all the emergency workers that you want. You can keep all the EMT workers. You can keep the emergency surgery people. You can keep the ERs open for emergency. Go ahead, keep them open. So without cancer doctors, you want to keep a couple of specialists to do reconstructive surgeries here and there. I get it. I understand. But you could get rid of the entire immunology division as it related to vaccination and disease. It wouldn't increase, it would decrease. And autism would go away as a new disease in kids, except for the toxic poisoning we're putting in their food and the air. But we wouldn't be injecting them with the poisons anymore, and that would be a benefit to stop doing that. Well, that's all protected by this fatty layer of peer review. So there, the psychopaths in the comment sections on the science blogs and on YouTube and on the rest of the places, the very few people who are clearly funded to have the free time to write 50 responses will always say, where's your peer-reviewed literature? Well, if you put out something that's made in a lesser journal, because only a lesser journal doesn't have the financial, conflicts of interest, to publish something true. So a small journal might be able to publish something true. So Wal Thornhill got a paper on supernova 1987A published in a peer-reviewed journal, and his article is excellent. The article explains that a supernova is not an exploded star in the sense that we think of a nuclear bomb going off in space, but rather it's a strong plasma discharge that follows a very particular set of rules. And what they're looking at with supernova 1987A is the discharge funnel in the middle, surrounded by a number of other glowing electromagnetic tubules, very, very, very large. This is not material blown out of an explosion. This is an electromagnetic pinch, and its secondary effects in a circle, in a ring encircling it, forming a number of countable plasma tubes, electromagnetic tubes, or Birkeland currents, that are predictable, that can be found and reproduced in a laboratory experiment with a plasma-focused device, plasma-focused gun. So he got that paper published, and as he said in one of his talks, he's waiting for it to be discovered. That's the problem with small journals. Put something in a big journal about how evolution is true, and Darwinism, even though it's flawed in every possible way, and so many mysteries now are there to be unfolded as the thing's been contradicted from every single angle, is still the best it's still the best thing we have. Well, no, it's not. Not if it's been contradicted. Big Bang, even though it's been contradicted from every angle, is still the most resilient model we have. No, it's not. And what if we got rid of it? What if we just said we don't have a model right now? Would everything fall apart if we didn't have an intellectual model for how the universe came about? If mainstream science said actually the Big Bang is so flawed we can no longer accept it as a mainstream model, we're not going to disbar you, or we're not going to reject articles from a peer review submission or acceptance just because they discount the Big Bang, because we really have discounted the Big Bang over and over again. We just don't want to admit that the horse is dead but it hasn't fallen over, or maybe it has and we're just pretending it hasn't. Maybe it's a rotting corpse on the floor and we're just pretending it's still, hey buddy, how you doing? It's not there anymore. Peer review is a layer of fat that surrounds a corrupted, broken, so-called scientific process. That's it. So I don't personally need a peer-reviewed article to see if something's total, utter fuckwittery and bullshit. If it's totally, utterly bullshit, it will make itself known to those who read it. It will say something like, HIV causes AIDS. Here we demonstrate that 175 patients who we say are HIV positive had sex with 175 other patients that we say were HIV negative to transmit HIV, and by the end, none of them transmitted HIV. I know there's a problem there if HIV is supposed to be a sexually transmitted disease. I don't care if 75% of them are using condoms by the end of the study and 75% of them weren't using condoms at the beginning of the study. There's a problem with that article. And that is the Padian study, by the way. There's a big, big problem. If you can get 75 down to 25, still 75% going down to 25%, not using condoms, a significant portion having anal sex, and nobody who's HIV negative becomes HIV positive by the end of that compartmentalized portion of the study. That's the major part of the study. That's the prospective, the part of the study that they're watching. They're watching that, and they don't get any negatives to turn into positives. No matter how much they squirm and call other people liars for quoting that big part of that study, that stands. Now, you can say a lot of things, but that stands, and that should point to the idea that there's a problem. But peer review let that study go forward, by the way. and then it was immediately defended as though the results weren't real. So every once in a while, a damning article will get through, and then the defenders on the science blogs will come forward and say that anybody who quotes that article is a denier of science. Well, just such a thing happened in the evolution game. And I'm going to read to you in the remaining minutes of this hour maybe the most interesting thing that I've read in a long time that is changing my mind about a lot of things. Let's look at the clock. 10, 11, 12 minutes to do this. I am not religious, I am spiritual. I think that the mind, the universe has a mind. The mind is an electromagnetic, infinite mind beyond which, into which we are a part of it. It is us, we are it. It is us, we are it. It is much bigger than we are, but we are certainly a manifestation, a blooming of it on its vine. The universe is electromagnetic. It forms constantly repeating fractaline, toroidal, twisting, tornado forms. That's the way it looks. That's the way it is. Clearly energy is always there. Clearly information is always transferred. Clearly the thing communicates with itself at speeds much faster than the speed of light. Across whole galaxies, parts of the galaxy are communicating with another part of the galaxy. That's why the thing holds together so well without falling apart as a very weak force like just a local gravity would dictate. No. So that's my spirituality. Now, young earth Christians are people who read the ancient Hebrew superhero tales and creation myths of the Bible and think that they're literally true. I've been pretty hard on them because they're pretty silly. They're very, very silly when they demand that it be taken literally true, that the clear Iron Man, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man stories of the Old Testament are true. But then they get into the naturalistic effects. And I become a little more interested because it's easy to make up a superhero out of a series of events. But if you look at the naturalistic effects that are going on, and you grant that maybe they're metaphors for things that were either seen or things that were experienced, but they're not entirely accurate, they're dressed up, there was no great recording mechanism at that point, there was no, well, look how bad our news is now when we have the internet. I mean, look how bad newspapers are at getting real information out. So what is word of mouth going to do? So you have what are called by guys like Dave Talbot, Walt Thornhill, Immanuel Velikovsky, unreliable witnesses. So you have to, as they say, figure out how to get good information out of unreliable witnesses. So let's say that you have a lot of people looking around and there's a volcano in the distance and the volcano explodes and they don't know what it is, they just see smoke on the horizon. So one person says it's a dragon and the other person says it's his mother-in-law, and the other person says the earth opened up and spewed out flames. What do you get from all of those people? They all say that flames came out of the ground. Well, let's say you ignore the rationale. You ignore the rationale, why they say it happened. You ignore the superhero story of why they say it happened. If they name a god, you ignore the name of the god, and you just say, just the facts, please. What do you say happened? Well, I say that the sky was purple and flames shot out of the ground, and then the whole world was covered in smoke, and then things began to fall from the sky. Okay. Now, but in order to get there, you might have to go through stories of how Apollo, or somebody went to the underworld and fought Hephaestus or Hades, and then the fight erupted onto the land and covered all the people. So you have to go through the literalization, the anthropomorphization. You have to go through the part where they make superheroes out of it. You have to go through that and sort of dismantle it and not get stuck in the idea of the superheroes. So if you go to the Bible and you look at that and you say, well, I'm going to ignore all the Jesus stuff because that's Roman era and people were alive and writing history then. I'm going to ignore all of the stuff during the Hebrew era after the Babylonian exile because they were writing history then and they just kept writing superheroes and how some superhero was going to come along and save them. I'm going to ignore the idea of an historical Moses because there ain't no historical Moses in the historical record. So what are you left with? You're left with a creation story in which there was a perfect world and nobody suffered, and then a world in which everybody was suffering, and life was very hard to keep up. Then you have another secondary story about how the world was the sun was blotted out, and the sky rained down charcoal, and a lot of animals died. And then there were plagues of other small insects, having probably been driven out of the fields where they were getting food. And then you have a lot of, well, what are you going to call it? And if you're of the mind of the electric universe theorist, you're going to call it electromagnetic discharge. And you're going to begin to look at these stories, and you're going to say, is the early Old Testament, the Moses story and the creation story, are these stories of a remembered past, and are these stories repeated in other myths? And then you look at the flood myth, and you say, is that repeated in other myths? Well, of course, actually, the Hebrew version of it was actually a repetition of the Gilgamesh story, which is the early Babylonian or Middle Eastern version of the Great Flood, the Great Deluge. Well, you have these stories all over the world. The Great Flood. It's occurring all over the Northern Hemisphere. It's a Great Flood that changes the way that everybody lives, and just about everything dies. Okay, that's interesting. You know, the worldwide flood story is, well, worldwide. So then you have to look for other evidence. You say, okay, so that's there. Now, what's in the historical record? Well, it happens to be that there are some dark ages, associated. There's also a change in the way that there's the dark age that fell over Greece that nobody can really explain, except maybe it had to do with the exploding volcano in Santorini. And what does this have to do with peer review, you say? Well, peer review doesn't allow you to look at an integrated study system. It doesn't allow you to look at myth and say, if we look at myth, and we look at the general time period it's describing, somewhere around, 4,000 BC, something like that. And you begin to ask questions, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, 4,000 for maybe, that the 3,500 for some of the stories that are being told in the ancient Hebrew stories. I'm getting the date wrong, I apologize. But 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago for the early civilization. What defined the early civilization was this huge change from essentially not having to farm to suddenly having to farm. That's an interesting idea. So we suddenly have to farm. We're not just wandering picking up food, but now we have to stay in a place and lash ourselves to the plow and the wheel and farm. And that's hard. And then civilization starts happening. People are stuck in one place. Other people steal from them. They have to build walls. You have to build better battle armor. You have to build better weapons to get the food. You build dueling civilizations. You're not fighting about food anymore, but you're fighting about land. You're fighting about power. Then you're fighting about coal, and you're fighting about oil. It's the fastest history of human civilization that I think anybody's ever done. But what are you leaving out? Why? Why was there this shift? So there are these catastrophists, and they argue that there was a shift because there was a shift. There was a shift because there was a great climactic and energetic environmental change. And I'm not going to talk about all of that during this show, but let me read to you from this article, which blew my frickin' mind. This is in the Smithsonian magazine. This is essentially past peer review. This has gone through peer review, and now it can be released to the idiots in the public, according to the scientific establishment, in the popular journals, the popular magazines. So Smithsonian magazine gets to write about this. Probing $68 million T-Rex, Mary Schweitzer stumbles upon astonishing signs of life that may radically change our view of the ancient beasts. Hold on a second. Did they just say they found signs of life in a 68 million-year-old skull? 68 million-year-old bone? Yes, they did. A tiny blob of stretchy brown matter, soft tissue from the inside of the leg bone, suggests the specimen has not completely decomposed. So, what happened is there's this researcher named, I just read her name, Schweitzer, Mary Schweitzer. I don't know if she's related to him. Mary Schweitzer, who says that she was slicing some dinosaur bone and put it on display, and then a microbiologist came up and said, do you know there are blood vessels in that slice? She dissolved the bone with some acid that would destroy the calcium but not the collagen. And now they have blood cells, blood vessels, fibrous tissue from bodies of dinosaurs. Now, hold on a second. I'm not reading from creationscience.com. I'm reading from smithsonianmag.com, and this is, of course, after all of this has attained peer review. Meaning, everybody who could say but already said but, and they've had to accept that now that they are slicing dinosaur bones, instead of just putting the bones together to try to figure out what the things look like, Now that they're slicing them and dissolving them, they're able to get chunks of cellular material out of what they say are 65 million year old dinosaur bones. Now there's a problem here in that it's utter, complete bullshit that you could get living extant, surviving cellular material that hasn't been totally degraded and decomposed with DNA in it, and that is what they're saying that they can get out of anything older than 10,000 years, maybe 15. But that's what they're saying. So, either it's not cellular material and they've all been punked, and even though they're reproducing it, even though they're doing it, let me read this. Maybe they're getting collagen. Of course, what everyone wants to know is whether DNA might be lurking in that tissue. Calls it DNA is fragile, hard to study because it's so easily contaminated with modern biological material, such as microbes or skin cells. Well, that should tell you a lot about the whole field of DNA, ology and study. While buried or after being dug up. Instead, Schweitzer has been testing her dinosaur tissue sample for proteins. They're hers, you see. They don't want to take public ownership of them. For proteins, which are a bit hardier and more readily distinguished from contaminants. Specifically, she's looking for collagen, elastin, and hemoglobin. And I believe that's what she's been finding. So she's using antibodies, immune system molecules that recognize to bind to specific sections of the proteins. So they're checking for chicken collagen, cow elastin, and ostrich hemoglobin. Let's see. Here it is. Further discoveries in the past year have shown that the discovery of soft tissue in the T-Rex wasn't just a fluke. Probable blood vessels, bone-building cells, and connective tissue in another T-Rex, in a theropod from Argentina, and in a 300,000-year-old woolly mammoth fossil. Was it really 300,000 years old? Schweitzer's work is showing us that we don't really understand decay, Holt says somebody else in the story. Well, I'm going to come back to this story in future episodes. I'm going to have to jump into the break. We're going to come back with my interview with Franke V. It's a good interview, and I want to play it again because you only get so many hearings on one show. It's a very good interview. But I just want you to hold this thought in your mind. I don't think that 300,000-year-old or 100,000-year-old or 75 million-year-old bone yields blood cells and collagen. I don't think so. I think that's bullshit. I think what they're actually saying, and that they're afraid to say, is that the history of the world isn't what we've been told that it is. We'll come back to it. This is the Liam Scheff Show on UCY TV, Truth Frequency Radio. We're in the run-out groove. We're coming up to the top of the hour. We're going to start the next hour with the interview with Franke V on Zen TV, Zen Live TV. We're going to be replaying it here on UCY and Truth Frequency Radio because I thought it was a very good interview. You can get his show on Zen Live TV. There are varieties of shows. The show that I was on was called Quite Frankly. He does a Friday night week wrap-up, and he's had me on many, many times, and it's a good show to be on. I generally enjoy myself. I was on one show where sort of brought out the screaming queens of astronomy who hissed and barked at me in their disbelief that I didn't believe them. And I said that dark matter and black holes aren't real. You can't test them. You can't prove them. You might as well just be looking at electricity because that you can see and test. Now, think about what I'm saying here. And I'm going to come back to this next week. I just teased it a little bit. I'm going to come back to it. Peer review is the fatty layer that protects the most decayed, decrepit pseudoscience from real examination. That pseudoscience happens to be well-funded and paying a lot of mortgage, or paying a lot of, what do you want to call them? Oh, when the university gives you not a retainer, not a pension. It'll come to me. But when the university takes you on and keeps you, and they can't really get rid of you, anyway, it's paying, and it's responsible for paying a lot of mortgages. So when you want to be enshrined at your university as a respectable person, you go and study the things that are respectable, like HIVology or vaccineology and how great it is, or Big Bangology and how great it is. And you make yourself immune to criticism. You have the big fatty insulating layer of peer review to stop any good ideas from coming in. Now, you could have a system of peer review that was a staggered system that opened it to the general public, to feedback, to people who were working in the field but had no degrees but were who were functioning in the field in a very practical way. They could give feedback, and then you could compare that to academic feedback. Just there, in that very short sentence, I described how you could fix all science. You could have an open system of feedback at 3 layers. The most important layer will not be the untrained public, although you give them a voice. It'll be that middle group of practicing, non-sanctioned people who are out there working in a field but without the benefit of university backing or even a degree, but they're working in that field. Therefore, you can fix the whole thing. All right, this is Liam Scheff. We're coming up on the break.
Let's talk a little bit about the first topic of the night. I'm going to let you take it away, set the scene. Vaccines. You said that nobody had to have watched the movie Vax to be able to grasp what you're about to break down for us, and that is whether or not it's actually even possible to have a safe vaccine or not.
The movie Vaxxed is a movie that was declined after being accepted in New York at the Tribeca Film Festival, right? Robert De Niro's film festival. Robert De Niro has an autistic kid, and he's actually continued a conversation about perhaps having the movie there, but he accepted the movie, and he was slammed in the mainstream press, like Salon.com and probably the New York Times. Anybody else who has a stake in the pharmaceutical game said, how dare you proceed to show a movie that is anti-vax? Well, he buckled, he collapsed. And as I wrote, it's one thing to play a tough guy in movies and I guess to be a tough guy in real life. Of course, I don't know who said what to him. Andy Wakefield, the doctor, put out a video saying what he thought had happened. I didn't see that. But the movie was then accepted and shown at the Angelica, and now it's been accepted into another Manhattan Film Festival and so on. Well, then it was rejected from another film festival, I think in Texas, I believe. So the movie's certainly controversial. But the movie, for being controversial, takes the line that it's not anti-vaccine. While it shows that the MMR vaccine more or less causes autism, or at least causes the problems that then are called autism, however they want to phrase it, that it causes the neurological and gastrointestinal problems that you now see in autistic kids. And the movie shows what happens to people who've been vaccine damaged. Now, I've seen this over and over again because I have many friends in this community of people who understand that the question really isn't, are vaccines safe, but what's in a vaccine? Very, very different. You really have to be essentially a reductionist at some level when you're talking about a product, and you have to break the product apart and talk about what's inside of it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so
you have a lot of years, and you have a lot of many different types of works and projects you've given yourself in investigating drug usage, testing, and all that stuff. So you have a very, very extensive background in this type of research too.
I do. My specialty was AIDS drugs, but if you want to cross the line into the vaccines, you have to ask the question. One of the same questions you ask in researching the AIDS paradigm or myth is that how does the immune system work? With AIDS, they say that you're infected with a particular. By the way, thanks for having me on. Sorry, I didn't.
I'd love to have you back, man. We should definitely do this once a month. I know life just took us away, but whatever. No,
it's okay. Well, it's life. With AIDS, they say that you're going to die no matter what if they test you with a test and they say that you're positive on that test. Now, the big joke is that the tests don't come up positive or negative for one thing. They come up positive for many, many things. And in order, this is an HIV test, and in order to determine whether you're positive or negative, they have to look at your risk group. So the tests don't really matter as much as the racial profiling. You know, they see if you're gay or black, and then they like you for the test. And if you think I'm joking, you can go read the extensive literature on HIV testing, the Bayesian algorithm by which they're interpreted, the many arguments in the medical literature, which you listen to these doctors sort of tearing their hair out about, oh my God, how do we know if it's positive or not? You know, what's the cutoff point? You know, we don't want to tell the wrong people. So it's kind of eugenics-y. But the drugs they give people really will kill them. You know, AZT killed a lot of people. AZT was a chemotherapy drug that stops the production of bone marrow, kills the liver, strips the intestinal lining. Well, you know, back when, I guess, drugs and vaccines were, petrochemical drugs and petrochemical vaccines were, you know, coming to the market at the turn of the middle of the century, you know, post-World War II, nobody really asked the question, how does the immune system work? They just assumed that antibodies were everything that you needed. But the immune system now is well understood to be the gut. In fact, it's so commonly understood that there are commercials on the television with, well, they had Jamie Lee Curtis for some yogurt company, and, you know,
Activia.
Right. They get some celebrity coming out saying, your gut's the most important thing. Well, celebrities couldn't say that without being sued if it weren't true. You know, if it hadn't sort of, if it were refutable. It's no longer refutable that your gut's the most important thing. So all the AIDS drugs kill your gut, and that's why, that's one of the 7 reasons that people die when they take AIDS drugs. The other is they kill your liver, suppress bone marrow, redistribute fat and muscle, destroy muscle and redistribute fat in your body and cause heart disease. So AIDS drugs are another story, and they're a mess. But then I had to look at vaccination, and I was always agnostic about vaccines. You know, I hadn't made up my mind.
Me neither. I don't know what to think about it anymore.
You know, I was agnostic about it, and then I just made myself do the unpleasant reading. And then you do the reading and go, oh, they lied about that too. Okay. So, so you go back through the history and you go, okay, I thought they got rid of polio. Well, and you read about what polio was. And polio was as loose a definition as like the flu. You know, some people had neuropathy, they had tingling. Some people had, they would drag a leg. Some people would couldn't breathe for a period of time. They'd go in a breather, an iron lung, and then they would get out. Some people would never get out. Some people, they did I think the Sister Kenny treatment, where they put hot towels and hot towels and cloths and stretched muscle so that the muscle wouldn't become, whatever the word would be, not desiccated.
Atrophied?
Atrophied, thanks. And then there was another guy named Fred Klenner, and he had a giant syringe that he would inject people with sodium ascorbate or vitamin C, ascorbic acid. And people got better. And he published this in mainstream journals that he was curing, you know, polio. Now he, with very high doses, you know, hundreds of grams of vitamin C. Well, vitamin C is what they call I can't remember, a reducing agent. In other words, it can bind with something and help the body get rid of it.
I've heard a lot of different things about the curative powers of vitamin C, especially in high doses, intravenously administered. Especially because, is it true that it's a smaller molecule or particle than even heroin as far as crossing the blood-brain barrier? Like it's one of the.
I don't know. I don't know that. I know that C6H806, which is vitamin C, is necessary for the body to create collagen, which is kind of what we're made of, what holds our organs up. It's intensely important in healing. It helps mobilize the mitochondria by bringing them energy, helping them get their energy source. It helps white blood cells produce hydrogen peroxide, I believe, which some white blood cells puke onto pathogens. So vitamin C is very, very, very important, and I've gotten rid of just about everything that I've ever had, like any bad cold, you know, 20 grams of vitamin C in a day for 2 days, and I was through a flu that took other people, 3 weeks. So vitamin C is very interesting. There's that case that now well publicized, I think in Australia, that a fellow was left to die with the birth. So the hospital says, oh, we don't know what to do anymore. And the family said, we heard about this crazy internet rumor that you can use vitamin C. Well, he's going to die anyway, so they gave him high-dose vitamin C, and he walked out of the hospital in a couple of days.
Crazy.
Yeah, well, because it's antiviral, antibacterial, and builds collagen and mobilizes mitochondria. And mitochondria are the engines of your cell. That's it. That's your engine. And the opposite, antibiotics, of course, kill your mitochondria. So you get weaker and weaker, truly at the cellular level, taking antibiotics. So I started looking at vaccination, and the big question was polio. Polio really came about in a period of industrialization. Before that, it was listed in the historical literature as occurring when being exposed to quicksilver, which is mercury, or aerosols of lead or arsenic. So polio seemed to be a variety of things, and it seemed to occur very much along the toxicological line. There were doctors who forwarded this notion. They said that, let's see, Scobie, Biskin. Anyway, there are doctors in the historical record who came even before, presented stuff to Congress and said, you're chasing some virus, but we're poisoning people. Well, we switched from poisoning people with arsenic and lead. We used to put lead and copper and arsenic on food. It was I guess a pesticide or maybe an herbicide or probably a fungicide against fungus. When we industrialized cities, we wanted people to move in from far away, and so we brought their food from further and further away. Well, food was coated, especially orchard fruit, was coated with these terrible, terrible neurotoxins. And polio seemed to track the wealthy. George Carlin has a famous bit, I've said this before, but he has a famous bit that only the rich kids got polio. He and his friends were poor, and they swam in raw sewage in the East River. Well, that's not good for you, but his point actually bears some historical reality, which is that polio was called it was a disease of affluence. I can't remember what it was now called, but it was a disease of affluence that affected rich kids as opposed to poor. That's because they were getting the expensive orchard fruit, or they were getting expensive milk from dairy cows, and poor kids weren't. They were whatever they were eating, they weren't getting all the summer fruit that cost more to bring in from far away. You can also track polio to being downstream places that were being sprayed with what they replaced lead, copper, or Paris green with, and that was DDT, another organochlorine potent neurotoxin that we use on animals and insects, rodents and insects, in fields. It has the same effect on people. It has the same effect on cows. Jim West pointed this out in his reporting, that if you feed cows DDT-soaked hay, their calves that are drinking from the mother cows get polio. They become paralyzed and fall down. So not a big mystery anymore, unless you don't want to know anything about this, I guess. The information's out there. So I sort of put that to rest in my mind, and it was clear that polio had more or less been a CDC, or pre-CDC operation. They changed the definition of polio, so you had to be sick for 2 months instead of the week or a couple of weeks that most kids would be sick. Polio was redefined as only the most severe cases, whereas a very small percentage of kids would actually be crippled from polio. Most would get better. But now the only cases that were polio after 56 or so, after the vaccine, were the kids who got crippled. And then everybody else went into a new definition called aseptic meningitis, which you hear about now, and it swapped one for one. Like everybody who was a polio case became an aseptic meningitis.
So then,
case.
where does Salk come into this?
Oh, Jonas Salk. Yeah. Well, he followed in a line of guys like Landsteiner and Popper, and he was just another guy grinding up animal brains and organs and injecting them into other animals, and he just had some crap that he injected into people that was made of some cellular slurry that probably contained a number of toxins and nothing really good. I'm sure it had some preservatives that were crippling. And after the vaccine actually went out, the number of paralytic cases went up, and there was a huge national outcry. There was even a big article in Harper's, I believe, about the total disaster of the polio vaccine. Nobody talks about this, but it's there in the historical record. It was called the Cutter incident. They instead blamed it on a bad batch of vaccines, and then they switched to the sugar cube thing. And anything you take into your gut is going to be less toxic than something that you inject into your body. I've told this story too before, but everybody in my family is a doctor, and my grandfather was a cancer retrovirologist, so he worked in all the totally fraudulent sciences that I sort of criticize. But he wouldn't let his kids be polio pioneers. He wouldn't let them get the vaccine. He said, we don't know what's in that. We don't know what that's going to do. So at home, at the scientist house, is a different place than the public pronouncements.
That's very interesting, yeah.
Vaccines. Before that, you had Edward Jenner, Edward Jenner running around scraping blood and pus, and we're talking about the 1700s. The science that we're doing today with vaccines belongs in a very brief period in the 1700s. It's not anything that you would base an immune supportive therapy on. So now we're doing this Edward Jenner stuff, scraping pus and blood off of animals and taking a knife and jabbing it into people's bodies. He did that, and smallpox went up, and there was a national outcry all over England, an anti-vaccine movement. George Bernard Shaw wrote about it very, very eloquently. There were prominent thinkers and intellectuals saying this is not the way that we treat illness. What you're doing is you're ignoring the reality of the fact that the body cannot be continuously poisoned in order to get better. Instead, the better method was sanitation and quarantines. So if somebody got sick, you'd sanitize the area, you'd separate the feces that was going out of the house from the clean water coming in, you'd make sure they had clean water, which was not the case, of course, in 1700s industrial, hell on earth England, the satanic mills and all that sort of stuff of the writers of the period talking about the squalor and living conditions. Very Dickensian. It's what prompted Marx and Engels to write their stuff. Just couldn't believe people could live that way. People dropping dead all the time, some towns said we're doing sanitation instead of injection or vaccination. Vaca from cow for the Latin or Spanish speakers, vaca meaning cow. That's where we get vaccination. We're taking cow pus and jabbing it into people's bodies. So the more interesting question is, how does the immune system work? And now modern medicine will tell you, when they're not crossing their fingers behind their back and saying vaccines are good for you, they'll tell you that the immune system's centered in the gut. So why would we be flooding the body with toxins in order to get it to produce antibodies that will easily be overwhelmed by pathogens, by the way? People who are 100% vaccinated groups, you get people in you get even sometimes large percentage of people in 100% vaccinated groups getting the same disease they're supposedly being vaccinated against. It's not like some sort of...
Yeah, I was going to ask you, is there any vaccine in your research, because we're dealing with your research and everything tonight,
Sure.
Is there any vaccine in your research that you've seen that actually does yield results, although may be dangerous as far as the substance there? Let me ask you a better. Maybe I can put it better. Is there a balancing act between effectiveness and danger, like secondary danger to the substance itself? Are there any what may be dangerous substances that actually help prevent or vaccinate somebody against a primary disease?
Well, that goes to the question that we were going to discuss. Are there safe vaccines or risk-benefit analysis?
Well, they can still be safe but be ineffective.
Are there effective safe vaccines?
Are there effective safe vaccines?
Well, again, the principle of the body, my answer is, of course, no, because the principle of the body doesn't demand penetration with metal to put any kind of foreign material into the fatty tissue or adipose tissue or the muscular tissue where it's generally injected. There are no excretory pathways from inside of your deltoid. You have some capillaries, but if you swallow something, you can puke it out and crap it out. But if I inject it into my muscle and it's even mildly toxic, it's essentially, it's not quite trapped in rock, but it's not going anywhere fast. And all the body can do is produce a series of inflammatory reactions to try to guard against the stranger in its midst.
Yeah, I never understood that. Why the administering is being shot right into the deltoid, pretty much into muscle, like you're saying. I would, if logic were going to dictate anything, and I'd ask the question, but I was actually happy I wasn't right, because I can't stand having even my blood taken, have somebody connected to my vein. I would think that if you're going to give somebody, if you're going to vaccinate somebody, you would inject it into their bloodstream and not actual tissue like muscle.
Right, because it's a very antiquated idea and it's a very bad idea. The reaction was to create a toxic shock syndrome. The absolute purpose of vaccines is to create a cascading toxic shock syndrome in your body so that you produce as much inflammatory reaction as possible. That's their principle. It's a very stupid thing to do because you don't want to put the body into toxic shock syndrome. You can almost see it being it's almost like abusing, spare the rod, spoil the child. Like you really have to beat people into shape. You can see that it comes from an almost Hitlerian point of view, to make an adjective out of his name. It's not a good idea, and there's nothing in the medical literature, scientific literature about immunology that says that by toxically shocking the body, you're going to have a longer, healthier life or be immune to future illness. They just had an idea. It was a half-formed idea that they made an entire international program over. So the new movie Vaxxed is essentially, they're showing a lot of the dangers, but not all of them. And my source, my friend who saw the premiere in New York, was able to tell me some things that were good about the movie and some things that I think are dispiriting about the movie. For having a national audience for a movie that's going to be very controversial, my understanding is that they didn't go into just that basic question, what is in a vaccine? I have to see it for myself. There's another off-color moment that I was reported to have been in the movie where they get Luc Montagnier, who's a total fraud from the AIDS business, saying how great the CDC did the AIDS thing, but not the MMR thing. Now I have to wait to get I'm waiting to get the final quote before I totally go off on your video program about how disappointing I would be that they wouldn't just follow that up. But in their favor, the movie Vax will show you the intense fraud conducted by the CDC to cover up the known dangers of the MMR vaccine, which is a triple vaccine. And again, Andy Wakefield's been on record saying he's not anti-vaccine, although I think he is, but he's gone on record saying he's not anti-vaccine, but he's trying to get people to have the option to have one at a time. I say just go all the way. Just do it on principle. Yes, be anti-vaccine, but be anti-vaccine on the biomechanical principle that antibody shocks aren't the way to prevent future illness, that polio was DDT, lead, and arsenic, that smallpox was not stopped by injecting blood and pus, by stabbing it into people's arms. You can actually see amputation rates going up in the British, for British sailors who they were mandated to get this done at a certain point in history, and you can see amputation rates going up among the mandatees for this blood and pus scar. So me, anti-vaccine, on principle of biological reality.
That very interesting. So one more question just to sum things up, because I want to make sure I got this right. So the injecting of these vaccines, especially into your shoulder, pretty much the way that I hope I didn't get this wrong, but the way that it triggers a response that is supposed to immunize and fortify the body is by creating an environment that causes the body to fight against what you just injected, therefore boosting the immune system.
Right, but it doesn't boost the immune system. It's like saying if you.
But that's the theory. That's the theory behind what it's supposed to do.
It was the argument.
That was okay.
But it's like saying that if you punch me in the face enough, my face bones will get stronger. It's not right. It doesn't work that way, except in the movies, I guess. So, no, they were incorrect. Think about a wound. We all fell down the hill. I was constantly running and falling because I was moving so quickly as a kid. Of course, you fall and you get these huge. You ever fall off a bicycle or a motorbike? You get these, scabs that are this big, and they take months to heal. Now, that's all that you have, and you have to be very careful to constantly wash out the dirt, or you get pus, and then it gets infected, and then you get a fever, and then you're scared. Imagine moving that beneath the surface of the skin. You've now taken the wound and you've put it where it cannot bleed out. Problem.
Johnny Vroom in the chat room asks, what happens if from right now onward we don't give any vaccines? What do you think? What do you project would be the case, aside from media hysteria and whatnot?
Media hysteria. The medical infrastructure would have to explain why massive outbreaks of disease, of 19th century disease, weren't happening. The answer would be in the historical record yet again, is that 19th century and early mid 20th century disease went away at the implementation of wide-scale sanitation. I would expect the media hysteria would take any case of measles and turn it into a probable pandemic, and people would demand to be vaccinated, instead of going, yeah, well, we all used to get the measles. That wasn't the end of the world. But if people could be kept calm and would be told by the medical authorities that vaccination was now optional and there was really no good medical evidence that trying to prevent some childhood illnesses through this medical procedure was actually better for you in the long term, and they made it okay and they let themselves off the hook, so there wasn't a lot of media backlash. The number one thing you'd see is, of course, you'd seen the rate of autism go down again. So you'd see that, which would be a blessing and a relief to a lot of people not to have their children disabled after being born healthy. Let's see, what else would you see? Well, you'd have to dismantle the CDC. You'd have to defund it, because the CDC is essentially a military outgrowth of it's military. It was quasi-military. The Epidemiological Intelligence Service is more or less what became the CDC, and their job, like the CIA's in the 50s, 60s, 70s now, is to go look for terrorists. But they believe that all pathogens are terrorists, so they would be out of a job, and the United States wouldn't be able to function the way that it does. So
when people who are advocates for vaccines say, and this is what I see very passionate arguments, and obviously you've made pretty poignant statements in the past about when certain subjects reach religion's status, where it evokes an emotional response out of somebody as defending a religion would. When I see very passionate arguments about how vaccines are the reason why people aren't dying from completely curable disease anymore and polio is gone, your main argument against that would be that the real factor in smallpox, polio, things really starting to go away is because of our commitment to public sanitation.
Yeah, there's even an interesting paper, a monograph that became a book. That means it was probably a PhD thesis out of MIT a number of years ago that I remember getting my hands on, called Water, Race, and Disease. And the point of this was that all of these parasitic communicable diseases of the light tropics, in the deep south, that were plaguing both the black and white community, but especially the poor black community, went away when sanitation was decreed to be the way of the way of the future, and everybody had to get sewage systems to pull all of the effluents away from their communities. Disease went away because they cleaned up, and the white population was so racist that they said the black community needs its own sewage system. We don't want our sewage treatment to be mixed with their sewage treatment. But it doesn't matter, because sewage treatment is the most important thing you can do in a water recycling system to get the bowel parasites, the colon parasites out of the water system. I mean, you go down to any country that doesn't have a very good and strict separation of water coming in, going into rivers, etc., and then water coming into the water table, and you have chronic, constant giardia, colitis, every enteric problem that you can think of. So, I mean, I know that people are religious about it. Baptism was really taken over by vaccination. It's sort of liberal baptism now. You're not a good liberal unless you believe in, I guess, vaccination, that HIV causes AIDS, and that global warming is... Sorry.
Oh, hey, listen, would you be able to talk global warming one night?
Yeah.
Okay, and what's your stance on that in a nutshell?
Well, climate change is real. Climate is definitely shifting. But the problem is our global magnetic sheath, our magnetosphere, has been weakening on an increasing basis since the 1600s, and rapidly in the last, 3 decades. And that protects us from all of the bombardment from outer space. Listen, mainstream scientists, and I'm glad we can talk about this now because I wanted to end with this topic. Last time, you and I, who usually get along famously, had a tough show. I got into a pretty ugly fight with a couple people over NASA. I think NASA is I'm going to switch topics now, and I'm going to stick with global warming.
Let's do that.
I think NASA is standing in the way of science. NASA propels itself forward as being the defenders of science, but all they really do are invent space monsters like black holes and dark matter and other things to spend truly millions and then billions of dollars to to prove. So there was this LEGO experiment. They did this LEGO experiment where they built these two things that they have like 5 miles of tunnels, 2.5 miles each for each. They each have, they each have, I think, 2 arms that are 2.5 miles long, and there's one over, I think, in Washington or Oregon, and one in the South somewhere. And they supposedly create these giant vacuum rooms, and they then tell themselves that they're, and they shoot a laser, and they tell themselves that they're going to be able to hear 2 black holes touching each other. Hold on. All right, so they tell themselves this, and it costs $1.25 billion or whatever dollars, $1.1 billion, I think is the going estimate, 1.1 billion with a B dollars. So this is everything Batman versus Superman is hoping for, $1 billion. But this is taxpayer money as opposed to just walking around money for Hollywood. And this is actually money that could put teachers in schools and food on people's plates and all that kind of stuff, glyphosate in the fields, more of what we need, Sorry, being sarcastic. But it's a huge amount of money. And then there's the CERN collider over in Europe, which is co-funded, by American and European space agencies. They're up to like $14 billion in order to accelerate particles. Well, how do they accelerate them? It's an electromagnetic tube. You do it using electromagnetism, which should tell you something. But NASA doesn't believe in electricity in space. They don't believe that space is electric, even though they now see electricity everywhere in space. They see electricity beneath the surface of the Earth. They call them tellular currents. They see electricity in the sky all the time. It's called lightning. They tell themselves that lightning happens when water rubs against water. Sorry, refrigerator over here. I can put ice and water in the Vitamix all day long, and I'm not making lightning. But that's NASA's idea for lightning. Yes. Instead of just saying that Earth is a charged body going through a charged space, and the differential charge is exchanged through the leaky insulation called the cloud layer, which makes total sense to anybody who's ever shocked themselves by walking toward a door on a carpet. We understand electricity in our own lives, but NASA can't understand it. Because they can't understand electricity in space, that the sun is electrical, that the sun is an anode, that the sun has a corona around it, which is frankly millions of degrees hotter than the several thousand degree surface of the sun, or 6,000 degree surface of the sun. You have this 2 at times 10 million degree corona, and even oxygen has been measured to get up to 100 million degrees out here, but the sun itself is down there at 6,000 degrees. And that would tell you, if you're just sort of a normal person and you haven't been brainwashed, that the hottest point is where the heat is coming from. Well, that would be an electrical current. Now how this relates to global warming or global cooling or global temperature change is that the Earth is a receiver of the sun's electrical current. And even NASA admits that the Earth is exchanging massive electrical current with the sun and receiving massive electrical current with the sun. They say every 8 minutes. They say every 8 minutes our electromagnetic fields converge and align, and we just suck up, solar irradiance, solar probably electrons, ions, and neutrinos. We're just sucking in this stuff. A lot of it gets deflected around our magnetic sheath.
But a lot of that protection is dwindling, you say now.
Well, NASA is saying it, and they've been saying it for a while. And this isn't some spec. By the way, I'm as environmentalist as you get, low on the food chain, pro-environment, all that kind of stuff. So don't try to paint me with that. I even made a movie about the terrible things that happen when we rely on oil too much. I don't get any money from anybody that's related to anything like that. In fact, oil companies, if you want to fund me, I guess I'm singing your song, but not for the same reasons that you're singing them. So it's not that I'm in favor of oil or coal, which is toxic, but we're going to go back to using a lot of because we're going to run low on oil. It's that we're electromagnetic. Our weather is clearly electromagnetic. Tornadoes, that 100 mile, 60 to 120 mile per hour, whatever it is, spinning form is the path of the electron, is the path of plasma. It's the repeating path of plasma discharges or instabilities in a laboratory. You can do this in a laboratory. You can't do Big Bang in a laboratory. You can't do black holes in a laboratory. And you can't do global warming in their models. Their models never work out. The IPCC, the NOAA or NOAA, nice biblical name, or NASA. Their climate models are all over the place. They never agree about what's going to happen, ever. And it's not that there wasn't a period of global warming in the 2000 to 2010 period. It's that seems to go not quite perfectly hand in glove, but pretty reasonably with a solar cycle, which shows a greater solar energy output, culminating in a number of sunspots and then decreasing. But the problem is our sun is getting very quiet, and even the top of the solar activity, or the maximum, was quite low, which means that our minimum is going to be absolutely long and absent. And that scares a lot of people who look at history and our relationship with the sun, because the last ice age we had was named after a couple, I believe a couple, whose last name was Maunder. It's called the Maunder minimum. When it's recorded that there were no sunspots for a long period of time, there was an ice age in Europe that was recorded in Europe.
Is that the mini ice age?
Yeah.
Yeah.
1600s, and we're just in about the right period of Earth's of a 370, 400 year cycle to run up against one of these cooling periods. Now people can say it's getting hotter, but they also know it's getting colder. They know it's getting wetter in some areas and drier in others. All of the stuff about the ocean rising and taking over the Statue of Liberty by 2010, if you remember.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was, the New York was going to be underwater by 2015.
Yeah, they're going to have to put up water barriers and stuff like that.
Maybe they were wrong, because they're looking at CO2, which, has been higher in the past and lower in the past, and higher during ice ages and lower. Okay, if you want to say that you're anti-pollution, don't get a Prius, get a bicycle, start doing permaculture. Be more like me, I mean, you can hate me for it, but I do everything that the global warming community should be doing. I mean, if you really believe in it, you should be a vegetarian or almost a vegan. You should eat very low and local on the food chain. You should grow your own food, and you shouldn't have a car. So then, I do all those things.
So then my question is this. My question is, it always comes back around to this, especially if you want to talk about government, whether it be foreign or domestic governments, world governments, banking cartels working together, their scientific mouthpieces, NASA, and anything else that goes hand in hand in supporting what agendas are and where it all leads, whether it be cap and trade, taxation, you name it. What is it then, from the standpoint of, yes, climate change is real, but we're ignoring certain things that are going on in the universe and certain trends that have come and gone in our history, and whereas it may be real, the human toll on the climate is not as well, unless we're talking about something like Fukushima or something like that, but the human toll on this particular issue. What is the end game? If they're spinning all of this under the guise of something that is apparently not happening, what is the end game? Is it just one world global government? Is it financial reasons? Once you have all the money under your control, then is it just power? What's the end game in your mind? For government and for mainstream science to team up and push this initiative, where is it heading?
It's a great, big, giant philosophical question. Give me one moment.
It's like it just confuses the fuck out of me, because where could it be? I mean,
let me try to chew on it. I'm not somebody who tends to look at endgames, but because I don't believe that most people are very good planners, and I look at government as being incredibly bureaucratic and filled with people who probably aren't the brightest people on earth, but are pretty narcissistic and arrogant because they think that they should lead other people. They should vote for me. I'll change everything, and they get in, and it's the Bill Hicks story. If they're important enough, they're shown them the Zapruder film from 7 other angles, and they know what to do. But let me think. End game. Firstly, let's say climate change is quite real. Secondly, let's say that with the weakening of the poles and with the weakening of the magnetic shield, shielding of our planet, which isn't really a shield, by the way, it's a porous electromagnetic field. Like if you have a magnet and you take it with another magnet, there's an invisible field, but it's there. You can feel it. So our planet has a magnetic field around it, but you can get things through that field, and that happens all the time. There's an interesting guy called Ben Davidson, whose webpage and YouTube site, Suspicious Observers, has a subscribership that we would all be envious of, and he's rather brilliant and puts together space weather, which is the weather coming to the outside of our magnetosphere and coming into the planet and how it affects us, maybe even provokes major earthquakes. This is a developing field. I pick on NASA because NASA steals our money. I mean, NASA gets $18 or $19 billion a year, and their science is terrible. They're chasing Einstein's time dilation and two black holes bumping into each other. Really? They didn't hear anything. I mean, they just made it up. Even worse than making it up, they did this LIGO experiment, and just before they did the LIGO experiment, I think late last year, early this year, they almost announced that they had heard the thing they were looking for. Not hard to find if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
And what are they listening for again? Because I don't understand this at all.
Nobody understands it. That's how they get away with it. It's not real. I mean, that's the problem with the Hawking kind of Einsteinian thing. You're standing at a blackboard covered in figures, and they think you're a genius because you wrote all those figures. Meanwhile, you're a mathematician, and math isn't science. I mean, math can be a tool to, engineer a local event, but it's not a broad understanding of a great picture. It's a purely arbitrary, artificial, or I should say a purely artificial but very specific description of something that may never happen and may be impossible. But that's the thing that you can do with math that you can't do. It's like Halo. You can play Halo and you're in this world, but you can't be in that world.
Right.
That's math. That's math, and that's maybe the best example. You can play video games, but they're not real. And that's what NASA does. They play video games with my money and yours, and the video games aren't real. But they what a good boy am I, Neil deGrasse Tyson stands up and says, oh, we heard black holes. No, you didn't. There are no black holes. Anytime that they say they hear a black hole, or they see a black hole, they're actually looking at plasma. It should be a dead giveaway that what they're looking at is the brightest stuff in the universe, hottest, brightest stuff. Well, that's a plasma toroid. That's an electromagnetic effect that's reproducible with a plasma discharge gun or a Torella in a laboratory. I mean, there should be a difference between science you can reproduce in a laboratory and stuff that you say you can. There's one that you should consider funding and one you shouldn't. So I'm all for defunding NASA for anything but its, satellite feedback. But you asked a question, what's the end game? I think that we're not that smart of a species. I think that we're a very tribal, religious species, and we simply elected, the cult of Einstein to be in charge for this century, and so everything has to serve that and not disrupt it. Einstein separated electromagnetism from science. He totally dismantled it. His theory has nothing to do with reality. He said that there's no ether, and this sounds a little complicated, but there is an ether in space that's made of neutrinos, and it's the light charge of plasma everywhere, of electricity everywhere, that gets very, very high and hot in and around large celestial objects. And in quasars and in the nebula, all that glowing stuff is neon. It's lightning in space. The sun is lightning in space. That's being powered electromagnetically and heated from currents from the outside. So Einstein didn't like that, and he said, no, there's no ether. And by doing that, he dismantled the principle of electromagnetism, which there's no electromagnetism and no electricity without little particles. And Einstein took away particles. So his shit doesn't work, and people have been trying to make it work for almost 100 years. Well, 100 years. I mean, there's some people, more conspiratorially minded, and I think maybe they're correct, who note that this LIGO thing comes on the 100-year anniversary of Einstein's make-believe theory of relativity. I believe that's the case. And so they wanted a stunt, and they did a stunt. Now, the thing is that earlier in the year, they said they did a trick on the LIGO team. I think there are like 4 guys running it. If that's not right for corruption, I don't know what is. A $1 billion project, 4 people in charge. And they injected a sound to see that was supposed to sound like the thing they thought they were supposed to hear, which is like a guitar string chirped, or I mean, that's it. It's so stupid, it's mind-boggling. Douglas Adams wouldn't know what to do with this. Anyway, they faked it, and everybody at the team thought it was real. And then they had to go to the team and say, no, that's what it would sound like. So you tell me. No, I'm serious. They faked it, and they had to tell the team listening with their, Bose headphones, their $1 billion Bose headphone equipment. Meanwhile, the whole thing's corrupted because they had like a hornet's nest or a wasp's nest being infested in the tubes, and they're right near a train track and a lumber area and a highway. So God knows what they're hearing.
Yeah, I don't know. It was like one time we went to go do a ghost hunt in the back of the Portchester Middle School. We went beyond the left field wall where we knew there was a little forest area, and there was actually an old grave site there. of a man that was buried just like, I don't know, I think like 1801 or something like that. His name is Nathaniel Brown. And we went over there to do a little bit of a ghost hunt and collect an EVP. Even though the road was about 20 yards off to our left, there's cars going back and forth. There's just all this type of stuff going on. So we're capturing all this shit on our handheld voice recorder, and we're trying to explain things that we heard in there possibly could be apparitions or ghosts. So. I don't know, man.
Well, they say they built the world's largest billion-dollar Bose silent headphones by sucking out the air, but they can't suck out neutrinos. That's the thing about these very deflated particles. And by the way, I want to reference a guy named Wal Thornhill, who I think will get credit as being one of the foundational geniuses of plasma physics when it's recognized, for constantly producing material that I read along with, I don't know, a handful of other people. And, he, among other people, points this out. But I knew as soon as I saw, here are two black holes touching, I thought, you guys, they say such absurd things.
It sounds slightly sexual, too, so it's kind of hot. I like it. They should keep going.
But it cost us $1 billion.
I hope everybody touches black holes tonight.
Seriously, NASA should be defunded because they lie all the time. They accept no newcomers. They accept no new ideas. And they fail all the time. If you actually read NASA's website, everything's a surprise to them. Everything. We're so surprised by this result. Oh, but our theory's fine. Oh, we're shocked by this result. But our theory's fine. Send more funding. It's like the AIDS theory. We're surprised at this result. It's not what we thought it should be by virtue of the lie that we told once upon a time that nobody was around for then, but that's what we live with now. Why? Because it's to your question. Answer to your question is we're tribal. There's no end game. We're just not that smart of an animal. We're some sort of tribal species that used to live in very small groups and really only had to negotiate the length of a day, and food was everywhere, and we had to share it. The idea that we would ever find an energy source so great that we could blow up the side of mountains violently and make stuff out of the goo we found inside wasn't really in our coding. I mean, we're tribal. You give us a priest to worship, and everybody worships. You say Einstein, and people think genius. Do you know Einstein said at the end of his life that he was wrong? I mean, he said that nothing remained of his, I think, castles in the air, and that if his suspicions were right, nothing he ever thought would be of value. That he was, and he wasn't just putting himself down. He meant that he was coming to terms with the fact that his Gedanken experiment, his imaginary experiment of space, was incorrect, that there was an ether, that it's electromagnetic, that he just wasn't right about the way gravity works. I mean, because of Einstein, people still don't know how gravity works. They think that, I mean, the supposedly most intelligent astrophysics think that gravity works because nothing bends, because space bends. Well, what? I mean, people will do treaties on this. I mean, there are billions of dollars worldwide in PhD funds going down this black hole. I mean, there's gravity because gravity is an intrinsic intrinsic aspect of mass and matter. Mass and matter aren't the same thing, which is why astronomers have a very hard time figuring out how dense things are in outer space, because mass, or what we might loosely think of as weight on planet Earth, but that's not quite it, has more to do with the electromagnetic environment that the thing is in. So, in a very low electromagnetic environment, I'd weigh a lot less. That's maybe why gravity seems to have shifted here on Earth, why we had 60-foot animals running around. They can't, just the heart couldn't have gotten blood to the head of one of these ancient dinosaurs in today's gravity. So you have to look at all of biological history as we know it and say, what do we know? What don't we know? We have to erase the blackboard behind us of all its fake figures, and we have to, again, sit down before the thing like we didn't know anything and start from scratch and start from the thing that's most abundant in the universe, which is electromagnetism. The reason we can't understand climate change is because we don't understand that our shifting poles, and our poles are sliding north and south, and our weakening shield is going to allow us to be bombarded by stronger electromagnetic forces from the sun and from the greater galaxy. And as our sun goes into a tired phase, its electromagnetic heliopause, its larger electromagnetic sphere will come in a little bit, and it will be bombarded by more, extra solar system rays over time. And I'm not talking over the next 3 years, but over the next century. I mean, it's been happening, but we're not it's not like we're alone in the universe. It's not like we're that special that we're immune, that planet Earth has to last forever and ever because we think that it should, or we need the iPhone 8 or whatever they're up to now.
Johnny Vroom wants to know if the poles can touch his black hole.
Probably.
The poles are big enough, Johnny, so you should be able to get lucky this weekend.
If you're in New York, you can get almost anything.
Especially he's in New Hampshire, so at least he's in the Northeast. But it's only a short drive to get to New York.
Live free or die, my friend. Live free or die.
Yeah, so that's really, really interesting. I was, completely unexpectedly talking about global warming tonight, which is very, very good because it's something that I have avoided talking about on the show altogether, only because my understanding is lacking, and I really don't like reading a few articles and trying to make sense of it or regurgitating what I've read on the air and passing that off as an informed conversation. So I always try to get specialists and anybody else who can come on and offer a unique perspective on these things. And of course, this was very interesting. And of course the end game idea is also pretty scary as well, because we know that the planet is full of stupid useful idiots. But what I always want to know is what is in the back of the minds, what is the top of the agenda for the very few at the top who are pulling all the strings, who are publishing all of the reports that we are arbitrarily supposed to accept as the official reports, the official stories, and everything else is either bunk or conspiracy theory. So, I mean, it always comes down to arbitrary rule over the masses, and my main question is always, what do they want? I mean, I know that we are dumb as bricks, especially when you put us in a group, but what do they want? That's what I always ask, and I thank you for bringing this up tonight, Liam.
Yeah, well, I held off on global warming for a long time, except to say I think the conversation should remain open. Because the first thing I heard about it was that the conversation was over.
Yeah.
The debate was over. That's the first thing I ever heard about it.
It's the only thing that anybody ever hears at all. It is confirmed. It is a consensus. And we had read the couple of times that we did bring it up on the show, I responded to it by reading off the statements that Michael Crichton had made about the fallacy of consensus science and how consensus science has failed the world so many times in the past, and how science is not determined by consensus. And if you haven't seen that, I would do a Google.
I read his
okay, so you did. That is one speech that has helped me at least fend off any attempt of having a belief pushed onto me, at least. So I have been neutral until a moment like this. Hopefully one night we can get you on and we can talk about this from the start if there's any new information that you'd like to introduce into the fold.
Well, I'm researching it more heavily now as I'm getting more into it. I've always, sort of just wanted to grant them that the climate was changing. I never really wanted to fight them on whether the climate was changing. Their idea, we have CO2 in an ice core. I thought, I've seen too many tests faked for too long. They had 3 scandals in which they tried to change data. They had emails in which they were admitting they were changing data. They changed the numbers in the past so it would look scarier for now. They came up with an excuse that, thermometers weren't as good then or something like that. But the reality is I'm not here to say that the climate isn't changing. I'll just say the climate's changing. But I would look at the most powerful driver of everything in our solar system, a.k.a. the sun. If you start, and Ben Davidson of Suspicious Observers has probably the best video I've seen on this, called 6 Problems with Climate Change Model. And he's spot on. He also points out, well, I was aware of this before, the Electric Universe people pointed out, and NASA has pointed out, that during the period of severe climate change and warming on Earth, there was severe climate change, warming, and weather pattern change, increased storms on other planets. Our CO2 is not affecting other planets. It's the sun. And if I want to be pointed, I would say to everybody who's not aware of this, it's the sun, stupid. It's the most powerful thing in our solar system. And it is electrical. It is connected to us by these large flux ropes, as NASA calls them. The sun itself is powered. Its corona is, intersected by what they call these plasma tornadoes. Does it really sound like a nuclear bomb over there going off? No, it's this electromagnetic thing. And we should really be doing research into understanding it. By the way, the sun could wipe us all out in a second if given a large enough coronal mass ejection. There have been certainly multiple extinctions on planet Earth, and there's no reason why we should feel like we're going to last forever. So all of this hand-wringing and anxiety about if we all just drive Priuses, we'll all be okay, is, of course, total nonsense. It's not the case.
Well, that's. I have more questions, but we're running out of time.
Next time.
I definitely, and I was actually about to tie in the Earth with Mars and the solar system and all that stuff, and try to ask questions through that vein. But that would open up another 40 minutes. So when we get off, I'll definitely we'll start rescheduling you in for another Friday night. I love these Friday night talks, but. Is there anything, first of all, plug all of your URLs, all the books that are out and published for download and on Amazon. Please give us all of your information.
Well, I detailed both the vaccine history and the electric universe in Official Stories, which is on Amazon and Kindle. It's hovering around $10 and change on Amazon right now because they did a little sale on it, and it's about $4 for Kindle. So, please support independent journalism by doing that. I'm on Facebook, Liam Scheff. You can find my YouTube channel where I post videos where I say these things. I have a radio show on UCY TV and Truth Frequency Radio where I talk about this stuff. I'm very, 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 very vulgar, so don't expect me to be nice on my own show.
That's fantastic. I'm actually surprised you're not more vulgar here, man. You know that the collar can come off over here, too.
Oh, yeah. I'm incredibly offensive even to myself. And in fact, I rescued myself from just a string of curse words by saying Immanuel Kant the other day, and I said, finally, I said the word Kant, and it wasn't the other way.
Perfect.
So you can throw a couple dollars into the PayPal kitty, which is, just, it's there on Facebook, it's there on YouTube. You'll love Official Stories. If this piqued your curiosity, you'll really like Official Stories because you'll get, did Shakespeare write Shakespeare, and is HIV accurate, and who was Smedley Butler, and what was 9/11 about, what was JFK about. You'll get, was Big Bang real, or what's the electric universe. I'll talk about plate tectonics, which is just another haywire bad science. It's totally useless. And Darwinism, another haywire. I mean, it's an electric universe with information coming through an eternal, as far as we can tell, an infinite system. We really don't have to evolve life here. We just have to be here, We just have to be smacked with water and electricity, and life will happen. Yeah. And I can't, all these a-hole Darwinists who just think they're so right because they rejected Christianity. It's so good. It's so easy to reject Christianity. It's of course not true. It's not historically accurate. But that doesn't make you right about every other thing that you say. And they've never gotten out of that grade school argument. So I talk about that a lot. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, man. And have a good night, have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, friend.
All right, be well. Everybody, that's Liam Scheff, and check out his book and all of his work. You can check him out on Amazon. The book is Official Stories. Find him on Facebook. Just type his name into Google and just find him everywhere. Google is great. Liam Scheff, Liamc. Asshole. Scheff. LiamScheff.